Wyoming Territory, 1884. The wind cut sharp across the plains as Clara Caldwell stepped off the last wagon of the day, her boots sinking into the mud of Sweetwater Ridge. Folks barely looked her way. A few women glanced, whispered, then turned their backs. The men barely nodded. She was used to it. At 38, unmarried and childless, Clara had become a quiet sort of scandal in every town she passed through. They all said the same thing behind her back, too old to bear children. She heard it again that morning in the general store from two young wives with full aprons and fuller bellies. One of them laughed and said, "What's she set in up a homestead for? Ain't no man want a barren woman." Clara had turned away and paid for her flour without a word. She had not come to Sweetwater Ridge to be liked. She had come because it was the last place in Wyoming that had land for cheap and a patch of quiet she could call her own. She was halfway back to her wagon when she saw the boy. He could not have been more than 7. Thin as a rail, dirt smudged on his cheeks, eyes too big for his face. He stood beside a post, arms wrapped around a little girl, maybe 4. She was barefoot, shivering in a faded dress, her thumb in her mouth. Clara's throat tightened. She walked toward them. "Where's your folks?" she asked gently. The boy straightened. "Gone," he said. "They left us." "Left you?" He nodded. His chin didn't tremble, but his grip on the girl did. "Said we'd slow them down. Took the wagon east. We waited. They never came back." Clara knelt. "What are your names?" "I'm Kit," he said. "She's Katie." She swallowed. "Come with me." Back at her wagon, Clara wrapped Katie in her shawl, built a fire, and gave them both the last of her jerky and half a biscuit. They ate fast but quiet, like they knew better than to ask for more. She sat close to them that night, arms around their small bodies, staring into the fire. She did not sleep much. The next morning, she went to the sheriff's office, explained what happened. The sheriff was a wide man with a sigh in his voice. "We get too many like that," he said. "Orphaned, abandoned. Town won't take him. Closest orphanage is in Cheyenne." "That is 3 days' ride," Clara said. "They would not survive the trip. And even if they did, they would be split up." He scratched his beard. "You saying you'll keep him?" "I am." He gave her a long look. "You sure? I know how old I am," she said. That was when she first saw the cowboy. He had been leaning against the far wall, cleaning his rifle. Tall, broad-shouldered, sun-tanned. His hat sat low over slate-blue eyes. He had not spoken a word until then. "They look safe with her," he said quietly. The sheriff grunted. "Fine, but you are responsible for them, Clara. I will get them fed. I will keep them warm. That is more than what they had." She turned and walked out, children in tow. The cowboy followed her out. "You need help?" he asked. Clara looked up at him. "Why?" He shrugged. "Because it looks like you were trying to do everything by yourself." She studied his face. "Who are you?" "Dawson Merrick," he said. "Got a cattle spread 10 miles west. Was in town delivering stock." She nodded once. "Thank you, but I am fine." He tipped his hat. "Maybe. But if you change your mind, stop by the Merrick place. Big red barn. You will see it before you hear it." She did not answer. But 2 days later, when a storm rolled in fast and she could not get the fire lit or keep Katie from crying, she saddled the mule and rode west. The Merrick ranch was just like he said. A red barn, a smokehouse, and a low log house with a porch that wrapped around like arms. He opened the door before she knocked. "I need help," she said. He stepped aside without a word. She stayed 3 nights. Dawson gave her and the children the guest room and helped fix her wagon axle in the barn. He did not ask questions. He just kept showing up, hammer in hand, food in the pot, stories for the children at night. On the 4th morning, when the skies cleared, she packed up to leave. "I will take you back," Dawson said. "No need. I want to." They rode side by side, not saying much. Katie clung to Clara's waist. Kit rode behind Dawson, his small hands holding on tight. When they reached her homestead, Dawson helped unload supplies and started chopping wood without being asked. Clara watched him from the doorway. "You do not need to do all that," she said. "I know. Why are you?" He looked up, wiped sweat from his brow. "Because you are doing something good. And because I like the way you look at those children. Like they are yours. They are now. He nodded. Good. That night she made stew and they all ate around the fire. After the children were asleep, Dawson stayed on the porch staring out at the land. Clara stepped beside him. What are you thinking? He turned to her, slow and sure. That I have been alone a long time. And I never thought my life would change. Until I met you. She swallowed. I am not young. Neither am I. I cannot give you children. He looked at her then. Really looked. You already have. She blinked. What? His voice was low. You took in 2 little ones without blinking. You held them like they were yours. That is a mother's heart. That is everything. Clara looked away fast. Her eyes burned. He reached for her hand. You are not too old, Clara. You are a blessing. Her breath caught in her throat. He did not kiss her. Not yet. But he stayed. And that night, she let herself believe for the first time in years that maybe, just maybe, she was not broken. Maybe she was just beginning. The wind changed by late March, bringing the scent of thawing earth and pine sap. Clara learned to read the sky in strips of color, how pale lavender meant a cold night, how gold behind the hills meant a dry morning. Her garden rose had been turned by hand, the soil damp and stubborn. Kit helped when he could, quiet and watchful, while Katie followed Clara like a shadow, dragging a wooden spoon through the dirt. By then, Dawson came by regular, never with announcement. He'd bring things coarse salt, a sack of oats, a spare hinge, and pitch in without ceremony. Clara never asked how he knew what she needed. He just did. One afternoon he arrived with a pair of kid-sized boots, worn but sturdy. Katie grabbed them and held them to her chest like they were made of silk. Clara didn't speak as she watched the girl's face, but Dawson said, found them at an estate sale. Widow woman passed, no kin left. Figured they'd do more good here. She nodded once. They will. Dawson didn't linger that day. He tipped his hat to the children and rode off before the light left the sky. That night, Clara sat by the hearth, needle in hand, mending a tear in Kit's shirt. The boy leaned against her leg, silent, the weight of his head warm through her skirt. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft. Is Mr. Merrick our kin? She paused mid-stitch. No, sweetheart. But he brings us things. Some folks do kindness without blood tying them. Kit didn't move. He looks at you like Pa used to look at Ma. Before things got bad. Clara blinked, eyes burning. She set the needle down and stroked his hair. You've got a good memory. He nodded once and fell asleep against her. By early April, the lambs arrived. Clara had bartered for 2 ewes from a ranch woman east of town. One birthed twins under a low cedar, legs trembling, cries soft as breath. Clara crouched beside them through the night, coaxing warmth into their little bodies. When the sun rose, Dawson was there wrapping burlap around the smaller one and slipping a flask of warmed milk into her hand. You were supposed to be in Cheyenne by now, she said, voice hoarse. He shrugged. The buyer canceled. Figured I'd check on the garden. She didn't smile, but something loosened behind her ribs. They spent the morning in the paddock, silence save for the sounds of animals and wind. After, she led him inside, washed the dirt from her arms, and poured them both coffee gone lukewarm on the stove. At the table, Dawson traced the rim of his tin cup. I've been thinking, he said. There's a parcel of land north of mine. Flat ridge, good sun. I could build a second house there. Clara looked up sharply. Why would you? Because I can see what's building here. And I've never much cared for distance when something's worth keeping close. She set her cup down carefully. It's not that simple. I know. You've got your own land, your own mind. I'm not asking to take it. Just to be part of it. Her hands curled in her lap. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. You said once you couldn't give me children. I didn't come here for that. I came because you've built something with your bare hands. Because that boy follows your step like he's learning how to be a man. Because that little girl sleeps with her hand wrapped in your braid. Clara swallowed hard. If I say yes, I'm not sure I know how to do this. You already are. She didn't answer, but she didn't look away either. The next week, Dawson started laying out stones for a chimney on the Northridge. Kit helped him cart them up in a wheelbarrow. Clara had nearly given up for scrap last winter. Katie brought them both water in a tin pail and demanded they taste the sourdough starter she'd helped Clara mix that morning. The rhythm of it settled into the days. Clara still woke before the sun, still cut her hands on thornbrush and beat dust from the rugs. But now there was laughter in the air, sometimes sharp like barked orders from Dawson when Kit fumbled a tool, sometimes soft like Katie's humming as she spun in a patch of dandelions. One morning, Clara found Dawson sanding a porch rail, sweat darkening the back of his shirt. She stood at the threshold watching him. "You're building that house awful slow," she said. He looked up. "I steady. Didn't say I was in a hurry." She stepped closer. "I don't want a house up there." "No?" She shook her head. "If you're going to be part of this, there's room here." He set the sander down. "You sure?" Clara took a breath, heart thudding. "I'm tired of waiting on what might be. You've been here every day, quiet and steady. You didn't try to fix me. You just stayed. That's more than most." Dawson reached for her hand. She let him. Under the wide Wyoming sky, with lambs bleating and wind in the cottonwoods, Clara Caldwell chose not to be alone anymore. And Dawson Merrick, who had known the weight of silence and the ache of distance, chose her right back without question, without rush. Together they stepped inside. The first time Clara touched Dawson's face without thinking, it was because of a splinter. He'd been mending a gate post along the south fence, and when she brought him a wedge of rye bread and a piece of dried apple, she noticed his hand curled oddly. He tried to wave her off, but she caught the look in his eyes, tight and unfocused, like the pain was sharper than he let on. She took his arm, turned it over, and saw the swelling along the base of his thumb. "Sit," she said, and he did. She fetched her sewing needle, boiled it clean, and set a kettle to steam so she could draw the heat into a cloth. He didn't flinch while she worked, but his jaw stayed locked and his breath came shallow. "You could have said something," she murmured. "Didn't want to trouble you." Clara pressed the warm cloth into his palm. "I've had enough of men who'd rather bleed quiet than ask for help." Dawson shifted, his eyes on her mouth. "I'm not trying to be proud. I just don't know how to be tended to." She looked him full in the face then, and without thinking, brushed back a strand of hair stuck to his brow. Her fingers lingered. His breath caught. She pulled her hand back slowly, blood still drying beneath her nails. That night, after the children were asleep, they sat on the porch as dusk curled low over the land. Neither spoke at first. The silence between them had begun to feel less like absence and more like understanding. Dawson reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He handed it to her. Clara unfolded it carefully. It was a land survey drawn in clean, sloping ink. A modest parcel bordering hers, marked off with patient lines. "I bought it last week," he said. "Not for building. Just to hold. If something ever happened to me, I wanted to be sure you had claim to the waterline." Clara ran her thumb over the edge of the page. "You did this without asking." "I did it because I trust your stubbornness, not your luck." She looked at him. "You think something's going to happen to you? I've seen enough winters to know not to count too many ahead. And I'd like to know you and those children wouldn't be left scraping." Clara folded the paper again, carefully, precisely. "I've never had someone look out for me without asking anything back." "I don't want anything back," he said. "But I wouldn't mind growing old near you if you'd have me." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stood and walked to the railing that would warm beneath her hands. The stars had come out one by one, unhurried. "You know," she said at last, "I used to believe that if I didn't have a man or a child by a certain age, I'd be nothing but a shadow in someone else's story." Dawson rose and came to stand beside her. "But then I started building this place. I learned how to split logs and dig a well and keep a fire lit through a storm. I raised 2 children that weren't mine because I remembered what it felt like to be left behind." She turned to face him. "And then you came along, quiet as frost, and never once made me feel like I was something to be pitied." He reached out, slow and sure, and took her hands in his. "I saw you," he said. "That first day in the sheriff's office. You looked like a woman the world had tried to break and failed." Clara's eyes filled, but she didn't look away. She stepped closer. "You're not just a blessing, Dawson Merrick. You're the piece I didn't know I was missing." He bent his head and kissed her, tender and certain, their hands still tangled between them. Inside, Katie stirred once in her sleep, then settled again. By the end of May, Dawson had moved into the house. His things came in a single canvas sack along with a whittled horse Kit claimed for his own. Clara made room in the tall cupboard for his shirts and let him repair the back stoop without saying a word about how long it had sagged. One morning, she found him at the table with Katie in his lap, pointing out letters in the seed catalog from Cheyenne. He traced the words with her finger, patient and quiet, while she giggled at the pictures of runner beans and white radishes. Clara watched from the doorway, apron in her hands. Later that evening, Dawson brought her a sketchbook. The edges were worn, the pages filled with penciled outlines of hills, barns, and the occasional curled script of a half-finished poem. "I used to draw," he said. "Before the cattle. Before everything got so loud." She turned the pages slowly, her fingers grazing the worn lines. "Why stop? I figured no one needed it. And it never paid." She closed the book. "Then it's time to start again." He looked at her, the firelight catching the silver at his temples. "I married a man once," Clara said. "A long time ago. He didn't want a wife who spoke up. And when the midwife told us we'd never have children, he stopped looking at me altogether. I buried him 6 years later, and I didn't cry." Dawson stepped close and took her face in both hands. "I've never cared for what a woman could or couldn't give me. What matters is what she holds. And you hold more love in you than anyone I've ever met." She leaned into him, her breath unsteady. "I'm not afraid anymore," she whispered. "Neither am I." The next morning, they planted sunflowers together along the fence line. Kit dug the holes, Katie dropped the seeds, and Clara pressed the soil down firm with the heel of her hand. Dawson held the water bucket, careful not to spill. By the time the sun crested the ridge, the four of them stood shoulder to shoulder, dirt on their palms, and something steadier blooming between them than any flower could promise. They were not a proper family, not by law or blood. But they were something better chosen, built by hand and bound by a love that asked nothing but truth. And in the quiet that followed, Clara looked out over the land she'd claimed with her own 2 hands and knew, without doubt, that she had everything she'd ever needed. By early June, the creek at the south edge of the property ran clearer and stronger than it had in years. Dawson dragged fallen branches from the banks while Kit skipped stones upstream, his collar damp with sweat. Clara stood knee-deep in the shallows with her skirts hitched, filling buckets for the garden rows. Katie sat on a sun-warmed rock nearby, holding a dandelion crown she'd made herself, her feet swinging above the water. "Creek's rising," Dawson said, setting his shoulder against a half-submerged log. "If it stays like this, we'll have enough to run a mill paddle come fall." Clara glanced up from the water. "You thinking of grinding your own grain? Thinking of building something the children can learn from? Work that's honest, but not only done with the back." She reached for another bucket, her fingers pink from the chill. "Kit's been asking more questions lately. Wants to know why you carry a knife in your boot and what kind of tree makes the best fence post." "He's sharp," Dawson said, wiping his palms on his trousers. "Not just with tools. He watches people. Learns quiet." Clara poured the last bucket over the cucumber hills and stepped out of the water, her hem dark with creek water. "He's afraid of disappointing you." Dawson's brow lowered. "Has he said that?" "He doesn't have to. It's in the way he checks your face after he speaks." Dawson took a long breath. "Then I've got to be careful how I answer." That evening, Clara brought out a faded quilt and laid it across the grass behind the house. Supper had been early cold roast, thick cornbread, and what was left of the molasses, and the air was still heavy with the scent of sage and cut hay. Dawson joined her with a tin lantern, setting it beside them as the light thinned. Katie was already asleep inside, curled beneath Dawson's old coat. Kit lingered by the door, watching them. "Come sit," Clara said. He hesitated, then padded barefoot across the grass and settled beside Dawson, leaning into his side without a word. Dawson waited, then asked, "You ever seen the stars this far from town?" Kit shook his head, eyes turned skyward. "They come out slow, but if you're patient, you'll see the whole sky fill." Clara let her head rest against Dawson's shoulder. "My father used to say the stars were holes in a barn roof and heaven's light leaked through." Kit looked at her. Did he believe that? No. But he liked the way it sounded. They sat in silence as the sky deepened, one star after another appearing above the horizon. Kit's breathing slowed. His head dipped against Dawson's chest. Dawson shifted only enough to keep him upright. "Clara," he said softly, "I've been thinking on something." She lifted her head. "There's a circuit judge riding through Laramie next month. Does marriages. Quiet ones. No fuss." Her eyes searched his. "You want to marry me legal? I already carry you in my heart. But I'd like the law to know I do too." Clara's voice was steady. "I don't want a ring. I've worn one before and it meant nothing." "I wasn't going to offer one," Dawson said. "I was going to ask if you'd wear my name." She looked down at Kit, his hand tucked against Dawson's chest like it had always belonged there. "I'll wear it," she said. "But only if it's ours. Not something I take from you, but something we make new." Dawson nodded, his voice rough. "Then we'll make it. Together." They didn't speak more that night. The quilt beneath them cooled. Kit snored softly. And above, the stars came out in full, bright and endless, as if the sky itself had opened just wide enough to witness them begin. When morning came, Clara rose first. She gathered eggs, set dough to rise, and watched the sun catch in the dew along the squash blossoms. Dawson and Kit emerged not long after, faces still soft with sleep. Katie ran barefoot across the floor to Dawson the moment she saw him. "You didn't leave." "I won't," he said, scooping her up. "Not ever." Later that week, they rode to Laramie with the children in the back of the wagon, wrapped in a patchwork blanket Clara had finished the winter before. The judge was an older man with a thin mustache and a good coat, and he asked no questions when Dawson gave their names. Clara didn't wear white. She wore the same blue dress she'd mended 3 times already, the one Kit said made her look like the morning sky. When the vows were said, Dawson held her hands firm in his eyes never leaving hers. The children stood between them, one on either side. The judge handed them the paper and tipped his hat. "You've made a fine-looking family." Clara folded the certificate gently. Dawson looked to her, then to the children. "We already were." They rode home slow, the wagon creaking steady beneath them. That night, Clara lit the lantern early and set a plate for each of them, her hands never once trembling. As they ate, Kit reached across the table and touched Dawson's sleeve. "Do I call you Pa now?" Dawson looked to Clara. She nodded once. "If you want," Dawson said. Kit grinned, the first time Clara had seen him do so without reserve. "I do." After supper, Dawson helped Clara wash the dishes, his hands warm against hers in the basin. "You sure you're ready for all this?" she asked. "I've never been more certain," he said. "You're not a blessing because of what you've given me. You're a blessing because of who you are." She leaned into him, and for the first time since she'd stepped off that wagon, Clara Caldwell, now Clara Merrick, felt no loneliness, no sting of judgment. She had a name, a family, and a place. And all of it was hers. The summer Clara turned 39, the ridge turned green in full. The wheat she and Dawson had sown by hand stretched high as Kit's waist. The hens laid steady, and the bees Clara had coaxed into staying nested tight in the old hickory box behind the barn. The house felt different now, not just in the way it held more voices, but in the way it carried warmth into the corners, like it had finally settled into being lived in. One late morning, Dawson was oiling a bridle beneath the lean-to when a rider came up the south road. Clara stood in the doorway with her sleeves rolled, a basket of laundry under one arm. The man wore a deputy's badge and carried a satchel with the Laramie seal. Dawson met him halfway to the porch. Clara watched Kit come up from the field, his shoulders tense. "Name's Reardon," the man said, adjusting the brim of his hat. "Got papers for Merrick. Legal land transfer and notice of next cattle registry." Dawson took the satchel. "Appreciate the ride. Been meaning to say," the deputy added, glancing Clara's way. "What you're doing out here's got folks talking. The good kind." Clara met his eyes. "I don't mind talk, long as it's honest." Reardon gave a quiet nod. "That it is." After he rode on, Dawson opened the satchel at the kitchen table. Clara sliced apples for drying while Katie worked beside her, arranging thin rings on the cloth-covered boards. Dawson handed her a folded letter. "It's from the county office. Says the boundary line now runs clean through both our parcels." Clara looked at the map. "So it's all one piece now. One deed, one name." She wiped her hands and leaned over the table. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," he said. "But I wanted to." This land's ours, not just mine. That afternoon, Clara and Dawson rode out to the far edge where the creek bent west and the cottonwoods leaned heavy with shade. Kit stayed behind to chop kindling, and Katie napped beneath a flour sack quilt watched over by old Mrs. Brenner from the next homestead over, who came by twice a week now to help mind the children in exchange for eggs and a jar of honey. Dawson tied off the horses while Clara stepped down, brushing dust from her skirt. "There's something I've been meaning to ask," she said, watching the clouds drift above the hills. Dawson joined her near the water's edge. "Go on. Would you ever think of teaching?" He blinked. "Teaching what?" "Kit's hungry for learning. And you've got more understanding in your hands than most men carry in their whole heads." Dawson crouched and dipped his hand into the stream. "I never finished school proper. Just enough to read a ledger and write a letter." "You know more than books can hold," she said. "And I've seen how he listens to you. He trusts what you say." He looked up at her then, the lines around his eyes softening. "You think I'd be good at it?" "I know you would." She knelt beside him, her voice low. "And I'd help. I could set up lessons in the front room, maybe even open it to the neighbor children come fall." Dawson leaned back on his heels. "A schoolhouse on the ridge. Not a proper one," she said. "Just ours. Just enough for the ones who can't ride all the way into town." He nodded slowly. I'd like that very much." They sat there a while longer, the hush between them easy, the wind in the grass like a hymn. When they returned home, Katie was awake and bright-eyed, and Kit had set the kindling in perfect stacks beside the porch. That night, Clara lit 2 lanterns, one for the main room and one for the deep shelf where she kept the books Dawson had brought her from town. She took down the speller and the arithmetic primer and laid them on the table. Dawson came in from the barn, his shirt damp with effort and with dust clinging to his cuffs. "You setting up already?" he asked, smiling at the neat stack. "I want to be ready," Clara said. "If we're going to teach, we'll do it right." He crossed to her and kissed the side of her head, his hand resting at the small of her back. "I'll build the benches this week." True to his word, he did. By the end of July, they'd cleared the corner of the house where the pantry used to be and turned it into a tidy learning space. Clara stitched curtains to soften the light, and Kit helped paint a slate board with fine, even strokes. The first week of August, 3 neighbor children came, shy and wide-eyed. Clara taught them letters, while Dawson showed them how to measure the weight of seed with a pocket scale and balance it against grain yield. By the second week, 5 more arrived. By the third, Kit was leading the younger ones through their sums. Late one afternoon, as Clara swept the porch, she heard laughter from the side yard. She leaned against the post and watched Dawson kneeling beside Katie, who was holding a baby chick in her cupped palms while the other children gathered close. "She named it Clover," Kit said, stepping up beside her. Clara looked down at him. "She's soft with the things she loves." "So are you," he said. Clara wrapped her arm around his shoulders and pulled him close. "You've grown, Kit. You carry yourself like you know where you belong." "I do," he said. "Right here." The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the grass. Dawson stood and met Clara's gaze as if he'd felt it. He walked up the steps, Katie on his hip, her braid tangled with chicken feathers. He paused in front of Clara. "This is the life I never thought I'd have." She reached for him, brushing a bit of straw from his collar. "It's the life we made." He kissed her then, slow and certain, and she kissed him back, her hand resting over his heart. Inside, the supper bread rose. The stove kept the room warm. And outside, the ridge held the sound of children's voices, the rustle of leaves, and the quiet strength of a life built not in haste, but in care. Years later, the house still stood, weathered but proud. The schoolroom had grown, with shelves full of books and a map of the territories pinned to the far wall. Clara's hair had silvered at the temples, and Dawson's hands had stiffened some. But he still rose before dawn to check the garden rows. Kit, now tall and sure-footed, helped with the young ones in the schoolroom, while Katie kept bees and sang as she worked, her voice as light as the breeze across the wheat. Every evening, Clara and Dawson sat on the porch, their fingers loosely laced. They did not speak much, but they never needed to. The love between them was not loud. It was steady. It was quiet. It was forever. And it was home.